Welcome to the Commonwealth Club and to Humanities West. So we're having a new season, and we have 4 programs set up for this season. So this is our first one. It's on classical music in the 21st century. I'll say a little bit more about it in a little while. In December, I think December 6th, we have Arias from Heaven. It's the 100th anniversary of Puccini. So we have that set up with the Italian Cultural Institute. We're having Gabriel Dota come from Italy to speak. He's an expert on Puccini, and we have Kip Cran, our expert here in San Francisco, to speak at that one. And in February, I think around February 6th, 7th, we have Hannibal's Carthage, Patrick Hunt from Stanford, and Douglas Kenning, who's spoken for us many times. And then on April 30th and May 2nd, we're going to have a 2-day conference called Lessons Unlearned, the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. We're bringing in historians and people that were involved, and a woman who came from Vietnam. We're going to try to give as many perspectives as we can in just 2 days on that program, right on the 50th anniversary, and then 2 days later. And that, it's going to be one of our biggest programs in a long time. So that's our plan for this season, thanks to Charlie Bowman and the other people on the board of directors. So tonight's program on classical music in the 21st century, obviously there's always, just like for Humanities West, there's always an audience for history, there's always an audience for classical music, there's always an audience, but there's also a business involved, and the business under financial pressures, including at the Commonwealth Club and other places like us, makes a lot of decisions different than they were at other times. And the pandemic is something that we've seen cut into the audiences. It was interesting when I joined Humanities West in 2005 to look back at the history of the audiences and to see what a fall-off there was after 9/11. Actually, it was, and that was never completely recovered. Maybe 25 or 30% never recovered after that. And I think we're finding the same thing is true about the pandemic. And it's, there's people say, well, you're going to lose all the audience because everyone's just going to keep getting older. Well, Charlie and I are getting older, but nobody else is. But you don't ever lose the whole audience because there are people in every generation that get very interested in it. But that's the whole question. How is classical culture presented in the midst of all the other cultures? There's other cultures that are far more popular than classical culture. But classical culture always survives and finds a new form. And I met Earl Blackburn a long time ago, and he's a manager of musicians. And he's from start to finish. His history is very interesting. He went to Curtis. I would tell a story about him almost going to Woodstock and perform, but that's a little bit too interesting. As a 15-year-old. But he, among other things, for example, he managed the last part of Ravi Shankar's career. He also managed his daughter's career, Shankar's career, but more towards the beginning. He discovered Lang Lang, the pianist in China, brought him to Curtis Institute and got him his start as a pianist. And Yuzha Wang, too, for those of you who follow classical music, was another person whose career he got started and launched. So he's been involved and at the top of the game for a long time. A very interesting man. So I'm going to have him speak, and he'll introduce Nancy, who's going to perform for us tonight. So Earl.
Thank you very much. The last time that I spoke in any sort of formal setting about our music industry was in China many, many years ago with a panel of other managers and people involved in the arts, one of which was a man named Mr. Lebrecht, who writes a blog about classical music, who spent his entire time on the panel saying, China's become one of the greatest countries in the world for classical music, and you can read about it in my book. And the thing is that the traditions behind classical music in China can be traced directly to these Indo-European traditions, et cetera. And you can read about that in my other book. So I haven't written books. and I'm not going to try to sell you any, but I am going to try to give you a behind-the-scenes picture of what this business is like these days. For those of you that go to concerts, you have the experience of enjoying a concert, which is what it's all about, and that's terrific. What goes on behind the scenes, why that particular soloist is on the concert, and not the other 1,000 artists that are equally qualified. You know, why someone like myself spends 16 hours a day sweating over details about something which seems so simple. You get people on stage and they play music and everyone enjoys it, we all go home. There's a lot to it. So I hope to pull back that curtain a bit, and hopefully it'll be an enjoyable experience for you. To start this telling of the story, which is what this is all about, I wanted to ask one of my violinists, my only violinist right now, Nancy Zoe, who's based in San Francisco, by the way, to play for you. She's going to play a piece, the Bartók Solo Sonata for violin. It's in 4 movements. It is not a crowd-pleasing melodic extravaganza that you will be humming when you walk out of here. But it does show what this whole venture that I'm in, that I've been in for almost my whole life, and that she's in as well, is all about, which is we're in this to tell a story. And by telling this story, we can further the art that we're trying to present. So I would ask, without further ado, to have Nancy come out, play the Bartók for you. It takes a bit of time, and then we'll go on with the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, nothing like a nice tune on a Friday afternoon. So, Nancy is one of my artists, as I mentioned, and I thought that you might find it particularly interesting to get, as I said, a behind-the-scenes peek as to what it means to even get to the point where she is now. And just like thousands and thousands of other artists, Nancy spent her younger years practicing, going weekly to lessons, playing in youth orchestras, playing with smaller ensembles, doing some solo work here and there. But at some point, she had this desire to be, I want to be a soloist. Now, to Nancy's credit, she pursued that head on, and she, among other things, won the I think it was 2018. I have to double check that date, actually. I wasn't with her then. No, it wasn't 18. It was sometime after that. Isaac Stern competition in Shanghai. Won first place there. She won first place in the Harbin competition also in China, although she is born in the US and lives here. Just happened to have those two competitions there. She started playing with a number of chamber groups and orchestras and recitals and what have you. And then the pandemic hit. And as for everyone in this industry, things went very quiet. For everyone in most industries, things went very quiet. And people like myself, being an artist manager, I was sitting around with a lot of time on my hands, to be honest. And I started to take a second look at our industry, what makes it work, why certain things I felt weren't working, and how could things work better for the artists that I manage. And that's shortly thereafter is when I got to meet Nancy, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. But that started me on this journey of needing to be clearer about telling my story which includes how best do the arts work, both for the administrative side of things and the audience side of things. Because at the end of the day, we're here for one reason. We're here to enjoy music. Yes, it's a business. Yes, there are lots of commercial elements to it, but music is not a sport, it's an art. And we're here to enjoy it. We're here to hopefully be inspired by it. We're here to hopefully have music give us questions that we can explore, give us a chance to look at ideas even more deeply than before. And it's quite a profound, to me at least, it's a profound thing to even be involved with such an abstract art and helping bring it forward. So I will tell you a bit about how I started. And I won't make this drawn out, but I was a percussionist. I went to Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, studied classical percussion. I also, as many percussionists do, play jazz on the side and rock and all that sort of stuff. We do those things. But I was really fascinated by this whole world of what we loosely call classical music. I was fascinated by the variety of music in it. I was fascinated from a very young age that there were these things called notes that you could put on paper and people could read them like you would read a novel. And I was always thinking, what is that all about? And as I started to get more involved with it, I realized it was all about this composer telling a story. He or she was telling some story. It could be a short vignette about a farmer, a happy farmer camping in the hills. There is a piece like that. Or it could be a much deeper story of tremendous pathos written by Tchaikovsky for a full symphony orchestra. It could be anything of those two extremes and things in between. But they're fascinating stories, all these things. And we as audience members get a chance to actually participate in the story. And we can tune out if we don't like it, that's fine. Or we can be fascinated and inspired by it and start to find out a little bit more of what's going on. So I was having a great life as a percussionist. I had just graduated from Curtis. A friend of mine was having trouble with his career, and he asked me if I could help him. And I said, sure. I was a freelancer at that point. I had time, to a certain degree, was my own call. And I said, yeah. So I started helping him and was really successful, helping him in a manner of booking concerts for him, giving him advice with his career. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was as green as could be. And I'm talking about pulling ourselves up from the bootstraps. That was my morning ritual every morning. I just had no idea. But it seemed to be working. And then more and more people started calling me saying, oh, I hear you're working for so-and-so. Could you help me? And every now and then I thought, that person, I see what they're about. I think maybe I could help them. Long story short, one morning at about 5 o'clock, I remember waking up sitting upright in bed and saying, oh my gosh, I have an artist roster. I have a list of artists, of which then there was about 7 or 8. And I said, I can't play full-time and do this. And I said, I've got to make a choice. I loved management so much that I decided what I would do is play part-time, open up my own agency, and things moved forward from there. And then before I knew it, I got a call from one of the major agencies, which was IMG Artists, saying they were opening a position as a vice president, and they wanted me to come there. I closed my own little agency. I went there and I worked there for a while. And then I moved to ICM, which became Opus 3, and worked there for 25 years. And during that time, I had interaction with a whole host of artists, from the biggest names you could imagine, and that's not to boast, that's just the reality of working in an agency like that, to artists that were just starting out, that knew nothing and needed very serious guidance. So my background is starting out as a performer and then becoming an agent. And then as I matured more and more working as an agent, I started to see that there were things that were working well for some artists and things that weren't. And I remember when I signed Yuja Wang, some of you probably know her, she's one of the big stars these days on piano. It was amazing to me the number of artists that came to me saying, would you manage me? I want what she has. And I know you manage her. And I always stopped and thought, but it's so individual. Why? First of all, why would you want what she has? Don't you want just the best out of yourself? And does it really work that way? But time went on, et cetera. Then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, I had the time, as I mentioned, to sit back and look at what was working and what was not working. And I realized that while there are these superstars that so many people like to talk to me about, for the ones that I've been involved with and others, I mean, Yo-Yo was in our agency, nicest guy in the world, nicest guy in the whole world. Great cellist, but a real mensch on top of everything. People wanted to talk about him. They wanted to talk about all sorts of other stars. But I thought, why is it that if we take something like San Francisco Symphony, something in your backyard, over the course of a given season, there may be a half a dozen pianists hired for their subscription concerts, that's their main concerts during the season. And of those half dozen, 4 of them will be pianists that have been there before. There'll be repeats. There'll be pianists that have established themselves on a cyclical basis. And 2 of them will be newcomers being introduced to the audience. How can it work that this industry has probably, without exaggeration, 2,000-3,000 pianists that could play that same repertoire and could play it credibly, if not better than credibly, well, and do those same concerts? How could it be that out of those 2,000 to 3,000, only a couple of them will have the chance to play with, for instance, San Francisco Symphony? And that goes for New York and Boston and Cleveland and Los Angeles and you name it. It's the way it is. And I started to realize that, well, one thing was sure is that everybody wants stars. They all want names that they know will sell tickets and that the audience recognizes. And I started to think, well, how do we break through the chicken and the egg syndrome here, which is audiences want artists that they recognize. They come to those concerts. Therefore, orchestras and recital series want artists whose names are recognized. To get recognized, they have to have been at that series and played. How do we break through this chicken and egg syndrome? And I realized that there's one simple thing, which almost sounds boring, that has to happen, and that is I and my artists, because it is a partnership, have to do everything we can to keep that artist's name in people's minds. So when someone's picking up a season brochure and they see that an orchestra is in a chance trying out or offering to the public a new artist whose names you don't know, something should be done ahead of time so that at least you can say, oh, I've heard of this person. I've heard of Nancy Zoe. I'm not sure where I heard of her. I've never heard her play. But I feel good about that. I know her. Let's go to that concert. And I realized that there were basically, the biggest need was for people to embrace the concept of exposure. And that's what all of these telling of stories is about. It's all about exposure for the artists so that you as audience members can get to know the artists, so that the orchestras, recital series, opera companies, chamber music series get to know the artists. Now, you may ask, well, okay, you get to know artists, but certainly there must be, with all these thousands of artists that you mentioned, and that's just pianists, forget the thousands of violinists and cellists, etc. With all that, there must be huge lists that orchestras and recital series pull from when they're booking their artists, when they're engaging their artists for the series. And you're right, there is, but it's very interesting how it happens. It's not meritocracy. There's not a list that people keep that says, okay, this artist has gained, 9 points out of 10 over the last year because of the various performances that he or she has done. And this artist has only gained 8.5 points. It doesn't quite work like that. And the best example is the casting director for a big company, opera company in Texas, who will remain nameless for the time being. who also works in Munich, decided that while he's very, very busy with his jobs, he saw a need in the market, and he opened up another company. And the purpose of the company was simply to get exposure for artists out there. An artist of mine said to him, "You're so busy. You know, you're casting all these performances, both here and in Munich. Why would you possibly open another company?" And he said, "Because that's what it's all about." He said, for instance, when I cast La Boheme, the first thing I do is I go after the stars. What stars can we get? Because everybody wants a star. All audience members naturally would love to go to Boheme and see stars singing on stage. There's a limited number, and those stars get picked up very quickly because everybody wants them. So their schedules fill very quickly. And he said, who do we go to next? We go to whomever we have in our mind. Not a list, whomever we have in our mind. And I've had this experience over all the years that I've been in management, where someone will call me out of the blue and say, "Oh, Earl, listen, we were supposed to have Garrick Olson come in and play this weekend. He just canceled. He's not feeling well. And you know, is your pianist available?" And the reason they ask me that is because they had just had dinner with that pianist. They just had that pianist in their minds. So I realized that a big part of my job was making sure that I could create a system through which these artists could get exposure on a regular basis. And that included exposure in 4 ways. First exposure is actually playing concerts, naturally, which we aspire to. And of course, when someone plays, that's exposure. That's where you, as audience members, get to know an artist. Second type of exposure is anything in print media, which is much more scarce these days, but there is still some print media around. Strad magazine. I mean, there are a number of industry-type magazines where people can get articles. That's exposure. The third way is with recordings. Recordings have drastically changed over the years. It used to be that artists could rely on making, being paid $40,000, $50,000 to make a recording. It's not like that at all anymore. The stars are still paid very hefty amounts. People that are not in that very elite group, which is quite narrow. Basically, a lot of the recording is funded by themselves. But recordings are fantastic for exposure. They're not about sales these days. Artists do not make much money from recordings at all, but they're great for exposure. And the fourth way, which is sort of funny because this came up long after I was involved in this business, but now it's a primary part of this business, is good old social media. It is why some artists turn regularly to social media and put up what we call posts or announce projects that are happening, so on and so forth. So that which, whether or not you consume social media or consume print media or consume any of the other things, all of that is available exposure that you might consume at some time. And that for the majority of audiences, they're hit by some portion of that or another. And it's through doing that over and over that an artist can get engaged and can get his or her career going. At some point, there is a tipping point. And I've seen this happen with a number of artists where they've come along and sort of sat around scratching their heads saying to their manager, when am I going to have a sustainable career? And hopefully that manager has enough sense to say, hang in there, it's very tough, I will help you, you need these other things going on, let's see if we can make this work. And before you know it, that manager, that artist will indeed start to have a sustainable career where he or she is invited not only to play once, but starts to be invited back to orchestras and concert series. That's the biggest part of my job. That's what I do behind the scenes. That's why I always tell artists, always go to a post-concert reception, meet people face to face. There's nothing better that people enjoy than to say, I know Nancy Zoe. Oh, yeah, I heard her play. I don't know about that piece that she played. That was a little bit wild for me. But, I heard her play. Yeah, I really liked the sound of her violin. Or, oh, yeah, I know that name. Oh, I remember now. I heard her play on this Humanities West series. Yeah. It starts, those sorts of conversations are what get an artist moving forward. And the final thing that an artist can do from his or her side, is he or she has to realize that there is no more stronger way to further their career and their exposure than the artist, him or herself, being in touch with every single contact he or she has out there. There are artists out there who will spend an hour or two a day set aside simply being in touch with friends, contacts in the business, and it can be something as simple as a message to them saying, hey, I saw you on TV last night with so-and-so, that was really nice, congrats. Or it can be something as interesting as, listen, I just bought this new book on Bela Bartok. It's really wild what happened in his childhood. Have you ever read this? I'm just curious. Just doing that gives them the same sort of exposure as the other 4 legs that I mentioned, and one that is even more vital because it's a very personal exposure. They're keeping in touch with their own contacts. One of my conductors, who when the pandemic hit, had very few engagements on the books. Fortunately, in one sense, because they had to be canceled for those that did, said to me, what can we do? It's during the pandemic. What can we do? I want to be conducting more, and I don't have a lot happening. And I said to him, please do this. Please go through your Rolodex, whether it's physical, electronic, or just in your head, and please take a portion of each day and be in touch with every person that you know in this industry. Just to say hi, I hope you're getting through this crazy time of the pandemic. He did so. He called me one day, said, Earl, I just got a call from Omaha Symphony because I was in touch with their executive director who I knew from years ago. And she said, when you contacted me, it made me think, we've never had you here. We should really have you here. And they want you to call them. So I did, and he got a date, and et cetera, and so on and so forth. And it happened with a number of other people that he was in contact with as well. So I say to my artists, don't undervalue the value of personal relationships. And you don't have to marry the person, you just have to be in touch. It's amazing what that network can produce for you. Now, so there's this thing about artists, really what they're playing is all about them telling the story of the piece, the story of their lives, and my job is to help facilitate them, give them the ability as much as possible to tell that story, the biggest part of which is helping them have exposure. As you might imagine, this is much different now than it was years ago. The granddaddy of all arts managers was a man named Saul Hurok. And Saul Hurok started during a time where Isaac Stern wasn't known yet, Rostropovich, the incredible cellist, wasn't known yet, but he brought these people over from, a lot of them from Russia at that time, at least Slava Rostropovich, and a lot of Russian ballet companies, et cetera, that he had contacts with. He brought them over and toured them in the United States. And he was an artist manager that when he went into his office in the morning, he would pick up the phone and say, there weren't computers, of course, and say, hello, Carnegie Hall? Okay, I'm bringing the following artists over, or I have the following artists here already, and these are the dates that you're going to give them, and each one you're going to give 2 dates. And then he'd light a cigar and say, yes, that's what you're going to do. And Carnegie would dutifully say, thank you, Mr. Hurok. Okay, those are done. And he would even go so far, in many cases, say, and this is what you're going to pay them. Thank you, Mr. Hurok. Done. That's changed a little bit, like perhaps 180 degrees, because it is not a seller's market. It is a buyer's market these days. And with so many thousands of artists and so many artist managers and artist management agencies out there, we're all vying for very, very few slots. So it's become imperative that we adopt something called cooperation. Having, just seeing what tried to happen at the UN, we see that there's an organization, begging, can we please get together and cooperate? Our industry, to keep alive, has had to develop and nurture the fact that it's one big collective. We're all cooperating with each other to make people work. If I don't say to you, I understand your concerns, I want to help you meet your concerns, and you don't say the same to me, nothing's going to happen. So that's the approach that we take, and then we move forward from there. And I do not have the luxury of lighting a cigar in my office and sitting back and smoking it and saying, thank you, Carnegie Hall, for engaging all of my artists. But when they do engage one of my artists, I do say to my wife, we've got to celebrate tonight. I just booked an artist with Carnegie Hall. Okay. So we have these artists that are aspiring, like Nancy. We have artist managers like me that are trying to make this all work. We cannot make this work without support from the public. So I always mention that not because I'm here to do any fundraising. I'm just here to let you know that the vitality of this industry is absolutely dependent on your input in terms of supporting it. It's an industry that will not make ends meet on its own. I remember I was in London backstage at Royal Albert Hall once, and Philadelphia Orchestra was playing there. And I was sitting backstage with orchestra members, and they had just gone through tough labor negotiations, which were ironed out, which I was happy they were ironed out. And a cellist pulled me aside and he said, look out there, the hall's full. And to think that they weren't going to pay us more money, which is what the labor negotiations were all about. And I thought, wow, does this person even realize the cost of one concert like that? It's way more than the total ticket revenue, which is why support for the arts beyond single ticket sales is so vital and so incredible. And this is where it comes back to this industry being a cooperative industry which dies if there isn't cooperation in hand. Now, I also wanted to tell you a little bit about how I and other artist managers select artists. I'm a little bit weird in that I'm, in many ways, an atypical artist manager. And I came to realize that about 20 years ago, when I went into a Woody Allen film, sorry, I have a mic here that I didn't know was hitting. I went into this Woody Allen film, which was a film, I'm forgetting the title actually, forgive me, but it's a film where Woody Allen is an agent in Hollywood. And at one point in the film, he walks into a promoter's office on Broadway in New York, trying to sell some of his acts. And he says to the promoter, okay, listen, I've got this one-legged xylophonist. And the promoter says, no, I don't want that. He says, okay, I've got this blind clarinetist. And the promoter says, no, I don't want that. And the audience is starting to roar with laughter. And I'm sitting there looking at this in tears saying, oh my gosh, this is what an audience thinks an agent does. Okay, you don't want Nancy Zoe on violin? Well, listen, I've got Frank Schmidt on cello. You don't want Frank Schmidt? Oh, listen, I've got Billy Bean on, It really, that is not my approach. Although, to be honest, there are some agents out there who do take that approach. And, God bless them for any success they may have. It's just not something that interested me. So what does interest me is whether I can resonate with an artist when I hear an artist play, and whether I can help the artist tell their story and get that exposure out there. I've had, on a weekly basis, at least 2 artists on an average come to me asking me if I'll take them under management. I don't think it's exclusive to me. I think this happens to probably every manager, because there are way too many artists that don't have a manager that would like one. But many of those artists are under a misconception. The misconception is that we have a magic button. If I can just get a manager, I'll have a career. It's not the case. If you're fortunate enough to find a manager where everything works together, what that means is you have a partner. It means the work will now get much harder because your partner's going to have all sorts of ideas and things that he or she wants to get done with you to make your career work. But we have no magic buttons that we push. Yes, we have relationships with the industry out there where we can talk to the artists, to the people about the artists, but there is no magic button to push. There are only principles that I've found work. And those are the principles that I outlined earlier about doing everything we can to get an artist's exposure. But before we can even get to that point, we have to have heard an artist and feel that we can do something for him or her. And the story behind Nancy is interesting. As I mentioned, I get so many artists each week that come to me asking for management. And out of courtesy to them, I feel for them. I know what they want is a good thing. Out of courtesy for them, I usually say, I'm sorry, but I just can't take you on. I don't have the bandwidth to add you, or I already have too many pianists on my roster, I can't add another one, or whatever it may be. I sometimes will refer them to other agencies if I know someone is looking for that particular instrument, which is not often. I'll often say, if I can give you any off-the-record, advice, I'm happy to do that, and then I'll be happy to talk to them for a few hours about what I think they might do. So I had a call one day from dear friends of mine who run a public relations office in New York for classical music. And they said, have you ever heard of this violinist Nancy Zoe? And I said I'd heard the name, I'd never heard her play. They said, we think you'd like her. You should listen to her sometime. So I sort of said, okay, fine. I filed that away. And about 8, 9 o'clock that night, as I was wrapping things up for the day, I thought, out of courtesy to my friends whose opinion I value highly, I should really give this violinist a listen. And I went on YouTube, started playing things from the Stern competition that Nancy was in, and I just stopped dead in my tracks. That's happened only twice before for me. Once when I heard Lang Lang play for the first time, and once when I heard Yu Zhiwang play for the first time. I just stopped dead in my tracks because what they were saying was so extraordinary, so beyond just good playing, of which there is a lot out there. And I sat there and I thought, my God, where did this young lady come from? And so, I found a contact for her. I was in touch. I said, I'd love to talk to you. I'm an artist manager. She kindly had a meeting with me. She was coming to New York for some work. And we had dinner, and I said, I think you should have management. This is a big venture. It is not an overnight success. There is no magic button. I told her everything that I'm telling you now. And I said, it's up to you. I don't hold guns to people's heads. It's not possible. But if you want to work together, nothing would make me happier. It's going to be a heck of a lot of work. Fortunately for me, she said, okay, let's do it. And then things started taking off. And now we're working on a bunch of projects that are really exciting. And also she's getting some very good bookings. And she'll be making her first recording, on which will include the Bartok Sonata that you heard her play here. So things are moving along. Things are moving along. I always want them to move more quickly, as does every and any artist I know. Patience is perhaps not always the strong suit of each artist, but that's okay. I understand that. And that's my story, what I'm about. Whatever I can do to loop in people like yourselves to be involved in this industry, whether it's just as a passive listener, which is absolutely terrific, or whether it's a supporter of the arts, which is fantastic and very much needed, whether it's someone that simply sitting at a dinner table says, what? Nancy Zoe, I heard her. Yeah, she played this piece at this crazy lecture that this guy gave. If that's the case, that's terrific. That all helps what we're trying to do in terms of furthering this industry out there. So,
thank you, George. And thank both of you. When you talk about exposure, and Nancy is now going to do a recording, are you talking an LP? Or what do you mean by recording? And the thing is, I would say a video without exception. Her body language is extraordinary. It's got to be a video, the whole thing. The music's fine, but there's nothing like imagery going with the sound. That is my comment. I think it would do wonders. And I've got the first buyer right here.
That is an excellent question. These days, when you make a recording, it can be issued in any number of formats. So it can be issued as an LP, they still do that, issued as a CD. The bulk of the way the recording will get out there is digitally through Apple Music, through any number of providers like that. That will be out there, but available will be digital hard copies, a real, yes, that will be available. And what you just mentioned, thank you for mentioning that. Nancy had the foresight to say, I should have what we call an electronic press kit for this, which is a term that's been used forever, which is a video of what's going on with this recording. It may be of just a piece or a couple of pieces, not the whole recording, but it is a video. And she was smart enough to say, I want to find a great video company, which we did, called Pillvox, based in Budapest. And we're hiring them, and they're coming over, and Nancy is recording it just up the road at Skywalker Sound. And so that's it. Thank you for mentioning it.
Thank you.
It's interesting how there's a similarity between what goes on in the classical music field and in the pop and jazz, and because they're not making money off of their recordings either. That's, again, exposure. It used to be, like you said, it's turned totally around. Used to make a lot of money on that. Now that's just advertising for a concert series or something like that where they make the money. What happens when the concerts are free? That's the end of the industry. Okay. Jojo. Yeah. And then there's Earl. Yeah.
Firstly, I want to thank you, Nancy, for giving us the most magnificent music. And I admire you so much for what it took for you to get to this point.
Thank you. That means a lot.
We're culture vultures. And I'd like to know something about you. I had my own public relations company, but I didn't represent musical people, but they were artists. And look at Taylor Swift, who is just a nightmare, but she had tremendous public relations. I'd like to know about you. I'd like to know how a beautiful girl like you, we all know you were trained and your mother was probably incredible, your father also, and maybe your Aunt Tilly. But how did you desire this? Who are you? My friend here asked, how old are you? Where exactly are your roots? Because this is what people want to know. They want to know a personal story, like Rostropovich. Mm-hmm. So if you can take the microphone and let me be quiet.
She's got it.
But you really, and I heard Chardish music also in that particular sonata of Bartok's. It was just magnificent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Jojo.
Jojo.
I am
Lovely to
Jojo.
meet you.
I'm Jojo Capeche Minutolo Osgood. It's a mouthful.
At least I'll
Just call me
remember the
Jojo.
first part. Yeah. Thank you for asking such a endearing question. I think it's hard to respond to something like who am I, because it's constantly in flow. But I'll start with the metrics first. So I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, to Chinese immigrant parents who came to the U.S. in the late 80s. My father is a violinist, still is, and he was my teacher throughout my youth. So that's kind of how it started, this narrative of me being a musician. He took it upon himself saying that, violin is the one thing that he's comfortable passing knowledge on, for which, and so he, started me on the violin when I was 4. I absolutely hated the instrument because I didn't like practicing during that time. So it took me a while to grow into it. And the impetus for that was going to a competition internationally and seeing all of these great colleagues of mine sharing their music with such, with the same baggage, for lack of a better word, of emotions, right? There's stress, competing against each other. It's to some extent, it contradicts the purpose of music and the intention, but it's a great way to get exposure, but more importantly, connect with fellow musicians who are in the same journey together. So I was thoroughly inspired by my colleagues, two of which I still keep in contact with. One of them went on to win that particular competition in Poland. And so I think that there was a turning point in there. I was 13, and I started thinking about what music means to me afterwards. You know, what does this grueling activity of practicing means? And it felt like it was my form of escapism. I'm a person who loves imagination and fantasy. I read so many books when I was a child. I went on to pursue literature in college. I still try to read, but life gets in the way. So there's a form of escapism, but also there is this beautiful activity of finding yourself within the discovery of other people's stories. And that, to me, it's the most powerful thing that can help you continue with a meaningful life and finding meaning through empathy. So that's kind of what I am about. I guess my life is governed by the values of empathy and compassion to the best degree that I can. And I grew up here in the States, but every now and then I do go back to China, especially pre-pandemic, to visit my family. And it's been, I'd say, twice a year, and all of my relatives are there. My parents, including my parents, have moved back. And I'm not sure what else I can say. Yeah, I'd say this is a good starting point. Yeah.
Can I just mention one thing? And that is part of telling Nancy's story that I mentioned is I said now she has a number of good engagements coming up, a number of projects that we're working on together, including one of them being this recording project. Another project that we're working on is Nancy has commissioned Vivian Fung, who is a composer based in the Bay, also Chinese American.
Cambodian.
Was she born here?
She was born in Canada.
Oh, Canada, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Canadian. Okay, so Canadian Chinese. Anyway, she lives here now. And Nancy, I said to Nancy at one point, I think we need to come up with a project that is not your run-of-mill project, because everyone, when they think about commissioning, they think about the same thing as, okay, we'll find a composer and, he or she will write this piece and we'll play it. That's great. I applaud people for doing that, don't get me wrong. But I felt that Nancy needed something a little bit more distinctive. And in helping her tell her story, we talked about having a piece that involves, first of all, it be for solo violin and electronics and visuals behind it. And the source of material for the piece itself would be sourced from her mother's village in China, which has its own musical tradition, and which Nancy, through osmosis, actually was exposed to and absorbed that much growing up, and which is a fabulous tradition in and of itself, and which is a dying tradition. But Nancy, so we planned this whole thing out. We're actually taking a trip there together. We're going to video document the trip. The composer's going to be there researching elements of this music for her piece that she's writing. She'll come back, she'll write this piece, et cetera, and then it'll be part of Nancy's programs going forward. I mention that because there's an example of an artist telling a story that has a unique twist to it. It's also an example of something that's very expensive. So part of our time is spent raising funds to even put that whole thing together.
Yeah. To add just one tidbit of information, my mother is a former professional folk dancer, so she, comes from the Boye folk minority group, which I would say they have their premise across southwestern China. So specifically, I'm from Guizhou province. Yeah.
Yes, Billy.
You can hear me? Yes. The question is for you, Earl. You said something that deeply puzzled me, but also greatly intrigued me as well. I'm by nature a literary person and a person of the visual arts, painting and sculpture. That's where I'm from. But nevertheless, I've been listening to classical music for decades, and I've had some illuminating and joyous experiences from Bach to Shostakovich to the 21st. I love 20th century music. Now, you said when you first listened to that YouTube performance by Nancy that you were electrified. What I don't understand is if you'd heard somebody else perform the same piece and it was plain and inert and just boring, what is it that and you called it a story too, which is part of my world. What is it that she added to that, and why do you call that a story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll answer that by telling you my experience with another artist first, if I may. When I first went to hear Yuja Wang play, it was at a small college in New Jersey, Friday afternoon concert. It was mostly senior citizens shuffling in and out, some staying for a piece, a lot of them staying for half the concert and then leaving, people talking. It was typical Friday matinee concert in a small town in New Jersey. She started playing, and within minutes at most, I was completely unaware of anyone talking around me, and I guarantee you 50% of that audience was. I was completely unaware of people moving. All I was aware about was the story that she was telling, her playing, what she was doing. It just absolutely entranced me. Now, not to embarrass her, considering that she's sitting next to me, but when I first heard Nancy play, I had a very similar reaction. I just stopped and said, what? Part of it was the way that she breathed. When artists play, they have phrases that they play. These days, and they have things that are very difficult to play. These days, most artists can play the most difficult things that 50 years ago they would have been sweating bullets to make happen. These days, even young artists can play credibly their way through very, very difficult passages. So it's not a technical thing so much these days. That comes into play, it's important, but it's not so much that I find lacking. What I find lacking is how an artist actually breathes when they play, how the music is actually living when they play it. When I heard Nancy play the first time, what I heard was an artist taking a piece, deconstructing it on stage, saying, wow, this is really cool. Look at all these notes. I really find this fascinating, and I'm going to put them together. Okay, I'll put them together in the same order that you asked me to, but I think it's really cool if I put them together and do this one thing with this group of notes. Play this one group a bit faster. Play this group with more emphasis on the D sharp. It strikes me as, I like the story that tells. So in Nancy's case, I was mesmerized by her playing because I felt that she was constructing in real time the story of the piece.
Would you call that also an original expressiveness, that she's expressing the music in an original way? Is that another way of saying the same thing?
I think so. And I would add to that while there is the prescribed part of the music, which is the composer has written down, these are the notes that you play at this point in this rhythm, there is the individual expression. And I find Nancy's to be enticing. I mean, I can't get enough of her, so.
Thank you. Your commentary about what you're doing in terms of finding artists, go out and network, get out there as much as you can, make phone calls, have a Rolodex. How did the internet impact your business and how you went about finding talent and getting talent to come to you and really marketing this talent? Did you find it enhancing, or did you find it really more difficult?
Overall, enhancing. More difficult in the sense that, first of all, it's not so much that I was looking for artists. I don't really do that because I'm pleased with the artists that I have now. But every now and then an artist comes along that's so compelling. When I hear that artist, I'll say, let me see what's going on there. And I'll sign that artist if I think I can do right for them. You know, I don't want names on a list just to have a name on a list. So what the internet has afforded is the opportunity to very easily get names of prospective artists to any manager, since all of us spend our days in some form on the internet. It's the ease of access in that sense.
And
Actually-
it also, the ease of access to, like you said, when you heard about Nancy, you could go on and find out how she performed,
That's true.
right? Because it's just sitting there waiting for you.
And then, you know, after you get to hear, after that point, then you get to really know the artists, and you realize that they're just as fascinating as you thought when you heard them, and even more fascinating. I mean, I would never have dreamt that I would manage a violinist whose main goal when she's packing is to make sure that she has a little stuffed bear, which she carries with her everywhere. It's true. It's true.
It's interesting. I like draw to one of our other programs because you with artists, you manage them. They change over time, just like a spouse does, or anything like that. You either adjust and say that the relationship still works, or it doesn't work anymore because people are, and of course, at least it should be more independent than even spouses. But in the literary field, like George was talking about a little earlier, you read authors, and if you really like the author, you like their voice, you like the way that they deal with issues, you wonder, are they like that in real life or not? Because some authors can be really obnoxious in real life, and you like their writing, but they're, et cetera, et cetera. And we had Adam Gopnik come out here from the New Yorker last April, and I got to spend time driving him back and forth, and he behaved exactly like he writes. It was like here's another writer, is exactly how it is, and his parents looked exactly like and behaved exactly like you'd expect his parents to behave, and so on. And he consistently over a 48-hour period never looked anything other than you would expect Adam Gopnik to be and to look like. And I thought, that's an emotionally consistent man. He was very, very funny, too, when he was here. He mentioned, I took some clips from things. He gave a lecture about Marcel Proust for us. And I took some clips of things he had said. And he started off by saying, I'd forgotten I wrote that. And you could tell right away that he had forgotten that he had written it. It was just a joke that he had dropped in the middle of an essay 30 years ago. Of course, he didn't remember it. But I thought the same thing is true for musicians. If you think this person is bringing something emotionally, then their personality at home, their personality off stage is often the same way. So, other questions?
I actually have a question for Nancy. Every professional musician I have ever met has a story to tell about their instrument that they play. So I'd like to know about your violin.
Yes.
And ask about the bow, too.
And the bow.
Well, the violin came to me quite fortuitously because I was in the thick of, I had a Strad before I happened upon this current violin that I have, which is not a Strad, by the way. And I was in the thick of trying to find a sponsor for this Strad, which was worth yeah, like 9 figures, I'd say. So that was a challenge. And then it happened upon me through a friend who took it to San Francisco, and this friend was hanging out at my husband's shop, who's a luthier. He was my page turner, by the way. So, yeah. So I crossed paths with this violin. He told me to try it, and I tried it. And then there was this point where I stood still in my tracks and was saying, maybe actually this could be a better match for me. So we took the 2 violins to Davies Hall to do a sound comparison and contrast, and it by far, for me, in terms of projection, in terms of sound color, and even playability, it was just the more superior instrument. So what it is, after all of this said, is it's a Giovanni Battista Cerruti violin made in 1815, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite old, but not as old as the Strad that I had previously, which was made in 1690, so 2 centuries, or 1.5 century older. And this violin, I've had ups and downs with it because it's quite fickle, and with violins, it's as live of an object as it is fickle. So thank goodness my husband is actually a luthier, and sound adjustments are really accessible for me. So I'm quite fortunate in that way. So it changes through time and with weather conditions, different climate environments as well. So, but all in all, I think it's my voice. It lends well to exploring different possibilities in sound, and I'm very grateful to call it my own now, which is not something that you see amongst young musicians or even just musicians in general who have the ability to own their own instrument, let alone something that really matches well with them. The bow that I have also, actually, it came to me quite recently. Bows are something that I've never really wrapped my head around in a clear way because it's just something that I don't know how appropriately is an extension of my hand, and it's only through the last month when I happened upon it again by a stroke of luck that I found this bow and I picked it up, and immediately the thought was, this is the perfect match without even playing a note on the violin. And then I played, and the immediacy of the sound, the way it speaks, the way it allows me to speak and sing was incredible. So very, very fortunate to have this bow, which is made by Francois Voron. I don't really know the year of it, but I'm guessing that it's about 2 centuries old, if not more. And it's a special one because it actually, just a fun fact, it previously belonged to a Greek violinist whom I greatly admire, Leonidas Kavakos. He had it for a while, and so that was just an added bonus after discovering this bow. Yeah.
You're talking about it made me think J.K. Rowling must have listened to a musician talk about her bow when she came up with this whole idea of how the wand picks the magician, and when the magician tries to pick the wand, because it's exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing to those of us who don't have our relationship with a musical instrument to hear that detail. That's really fantastic. There's another question from the audience here. Can you tell us about the sonata, the Bartók sonata that you played? What's behind that one? And you've picked that one out for your new recording, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll start with my personal feelings for the sonata and for Bartók. Bartók is a composer, I would say he's kind of known as the first great musicologist, rediscovering the voice of Hungary, musically speaking, but also there's a little bit of cultural appropriation, but we don't ever know whether the peasants from these villages across Eastern Europe would have sanctioned that or not. But Bartók was the first great composer who traveled to these just thick in the fields peasant villages to painstakingly and scientifically record and document the songs of these peasants. And he took it upon himself to create this musical language that was distinctly his, that was distinctly Hungarian, but also authentically Hungarian. And that's why I have such great admiration, because he really was for the music, for the sake of music, and as a conduit for expression, the most authentic expression of people you may never have come across, you know. So, and this spoke personally to me because my mother is from folk minority group, and so there's that personal relationship with him. And the music itself, I'd say it's not your average, actually Earl had a good phrase, elevator music. But the more you go into the world of Bartók, the more you just can't exit afterwards, because he wrote so many accessible music for children, first of all. And then he had the, Mikrokosmos, which is also a collection of songs, peasant songs, which when you hear it, it's very accessible. With the sonata, it's inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the great Baroque composers, and who also advocated for, polyphony and just complex formal structures. But it's so the harmonies, the harmonic language is just fascinating to me. And so Bartók took elements from the Baroque era and compositional techniques from then, but kind of combined it with these Hungarian folk idioms, elements from the Hungarian folk idiom. So the first movement was an allusion to Bach's famous Chaconne, which is from his second violin partita. It's a stylized dance that has folk rhythms in it. The second movement was a little bit complicated. It's a fugue that involves, multiple voices interacting with each other. And I always found it very fascinating that one instrument can produce so many different voices, one at a time. And then you can engage in this complicated dialogue. But for me, it was the most satisfying to play once you figure it out in your head, technically how to make these voices come alive. So I hope it was an enjoyable experience in that sense. The third movement actually is also one of my favorites because it really pulls you inward. It attracts you to it. I don't know. It encourages your imagination to kind of dance around the sounds of nature at night. It's night music, a compositional technique genre of music that Bartók coined, actually. Literally, it's the sound conception of nature at night. So you hear birds, you hear crickets, you hear abstract sounds that evoke the darkness and the serenity of whatever image you want to conceive in the evening. And the last movement is actually quite interesting, also taps into the nature theme. I don't know if you recall, but it evokes, buzzing of bees, and that's something that Bartók, it really does speak to Bartók's love for animals, which I can confirm because I read some of his essays and stories. So it's a work that's personally, I just find it speaks so much to me, and I can't wait to record it. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, it's the second to last work, before his death. So the other one was his great concerto for orchestra. So that's a work that I would highly recommend listening to as well.
All right, we have another question. You mentioned that your husband, Adam, is a luthier?
Mm-hmm.
Luthier. Do you want to explain what that is?
My husband's right there, he can explain. Well, essentially, simply it's just a violin maker, but he is, I would say I'm pretty biased, but a rare combination of a craftsman and sound wizard. So you can tamper with the innards of a violin to make, completely change the soundscape of that one instrument. And he also is an expert in fine violins, but yeah.
So he makes violins.
Yeah, he trained as a violin maker, but
Yeah.
I shouldn't be speaking for him. He should probably.
No, you should be speaking for him.
Oh, okay.
Husbands have been doing that for their wives forever. So.
Okay.
So one last question. on that thing, speaking for him, who is Adam's favorite violinist?
Well,
Way to go,
well, the
Adam.
fact that I took my time, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's good to play favorites. Yeah, but we both have a penchant for Natan Milstein, the Odessa-trained Ukrainian violinist, but Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe second favorite is me. I don't know.
All right. Are there any other questions? Anything else that you'd like to ask Nancy or Earl? Yes. Okay.
I have one question.
Okay, great. Here's the mic. Yeah.
Yes, Nancy. Where are you next performing in the Bay Area?
Oh, Bay Area. Well, the immediate one that I'm thinking about is in Santa Cruz, actually. Very grateful to be the artist in residence of the Santa Cruz Symphony for a year or two. And I'm playing Eric Korngold's Violin Concerto with the Santa Cruz Symphony beginning of November, specifically 2nd and 3rd, so first weekend of November. I hope to see you there.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, George.
And so ends another event at the Commonwealth Club and for Humanities West. It's our 121st year at the Commonwealth Club and the 41st year for the Humanities West. So I hope to all see you in December for Puccini, and enjoy your evening. I think several people are going to have a nice dinner, from what I've heard.